Tonight on Need to Know, the idea of Rochester's mayor controlling the city school district is in the spotlight yet again. Why do some call mayoral control a game changer if critics say there's not enough proof it even works? That story is next. Also on the show, a longtime Rochester City Council member is hanging up her political hat to drill down on issues intensifying in our community. A conversation with Elaine Spall later on the show. And telling the story of a generation through pottery. Don't go anywhere. Need to Know starts right now. Some heavyweights in state politics say they support a leadership shakeup in the Rochester City School District. If you thought the idea of mayoral control had died down years ago, it's back. Assemblyman David Gant is pushing for reform by recently introducing 2 bills to the state legislature. Both would take power away from the school board. Gant says a change is essential because, quote, we can't just let kids sit there and die on the vine. Mayoral control has its share of supporters and opponents. One critic being Rochester School Board President Van White, who joins me now. And welcome back, Van. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So mayoral control of districts is obviously perceived differently by different people based on their role in public education. So Van, what does this concept mean to you as president of the school board?
Well, I'm just going to key on one phrase that you use. I don't know if it's a quote from David Gant, but when you talk about dying on the vine, the reality is, sadly, kids are dying in our streets, in their homes. Kids are dying, at least mentally and spiritually, in our courthouses. Families are dying in our hospitals because of inadequate health care. So the question has to become not who is to blame, but who's going to be part of the solution. So I think the narrative about that the problems begin at the school door is a mistake, because the reality is 14621 is a district in our community, the northeast side of the city, that has been described in various ways. It's been often referred to as the crescent because it's a concentration of poverty there. And that's been going on for years, since and before David Gant got there, and it still continues to this day. The reality is I would never blame David Gant for what is going on there any more than I would think that he would blame the thousands of people that work day in and day out. The question is it about control for one person, or is it about control for an entire community? So it should be about principal control, parent control, preacher control, superintendent control, police control, neighborhood control. There's no one person that's going to fix this problem. And that's the problem with mayoral control. It's sort of the Superman complex, that the idea that one person could solve this problem. So
you don't think, in terms of, you say it's a Superman complex, you don't think that different people can weigh in then? If in fact mayoral control were to take place, you don't think that different voices can add to the conversation and that the mayor would take that into consideration and carry it out?
Well, I tell you, that's what's happening now. I mean, for example, look at East High School. We brought in a major community partner, the University of Rochester, the #1 employer in that region. And what has happened since we brought them in, not one person, but a whole institution that has all kinds of jobs and education that they can bring to the table. What happened? And 3 years ago, East High School's 4-year graduation rate was 31%. Now it's at 61. Not one person did that. An entire community, including our largest employer, did that. Number 17 school, which is a school which we call the Beacon School. Mayor Warren is involved in that school. A whole community of people are involved in transitioning that school. That school has had some success in terms of performance indicators. The moral of this story, of these stories, is that not one person, these success stories, is not one person is responsible for the change, but a community of people. So if David Gant or Mayor Warren are talking about bringing in community partnerships and supporting good people that are already working, indulge me for a moment. Since the last 12 years, the graduation rate has gone like this. here's the irony. When David Gant first proposed this in 2007, do you know what the 4-year graduation rate was? I'll tell you, it was 39%. It's now 59%. So if it wasn't needed then, when our graduation rate was just 39%, why would people upend the apple cart when in fact our graduation rate is 20% higher, points higher? That doesn't mean there's great work to be done. But the point is, who's going to do that work? And we submit it should be at the community.
So let me jump in. So the mayor spoke with WXXI's James Brown yesterday, and she said that she's tried to get in touch with the district, the board, to talk about this in more detail, and that there has been pushback in the past when she's tried to partnership. So what would you say to that when you're saying we can all get together and we can work on this to help bring change if she's having a hard time getting in touch?
Well, in my business, my other line of business, I'm a lawyer, we would call that hearsay. So I wouldn't dare, and in your line of business, you probably wouldn't necessarily rely on that. I can tell you this, I can show you the texts, the emails, the memos that reflect a one-on-one conversation between Mayor Warren and I. I can show you memorandums of understanding, so how we can work together between the rec centers and our schools. We've developed specific memorandums of understanding so that we can exchange information about students. So it's just not accurate what you are hearing, and I don't think Mayor Warren would say that, because I know she and I have talked regularly and frequently about the status of the schools, including conversations about mayoral control. So it's just not, and I gave another example, number 17 school. So it's just not accurate, the information that you are getting. I didn't hear her say that, and it doesn't sound like you heard her say that. I can tell you this, I can show you emails and texts. I can show you a memorandum of understanding about how we're going to work together, our rec centers and our schools. I can show you agenda items and times in which she and I have gone to elementary schools to read to kids. I can show you extensive meeting minutes about number 17 school, the Beacon School. So it's just not accurate to say that the mayor does not have direct line of communication with myself.
And again, this was not saying that she did not have a direct line of communication. It was that recently when trying to get in touch. I just want to clarify that.
Well, and I want to be clear. I can show you a memorandum of understanding about how we agreed to communicate so that if a child goes into a rec center and he's not been in school all day, that officials who otherwise at the rec center who would not have access legally to a child's academics record can now get access to it. So that's a recent agreement. So
I'm gonna just because I know our time is limited, I'm gonna move on. So the Center for American Progress, which is a nonpartisan policy institute, released a report a few years ago examining mayoral control, and it looked into two specific things: resource management and student achievement. In short, the report found that mayoral governance has improved urban districts, and it especially pointed out that if the mayor is heavily invested in public education. So I want to know, all that being said, why do you think there's not enough evidence that something like this could work in Rochester?
Well, I mean, for every report that you can show that it does work, you can show sort of the research reports to show that it doesn't. For every city that it has worked in, you can probably show 2 cities that not. New York City, it seems to have worked pretty well. Chicago, not so much. I mean, have you seen the headlines in Chicago? Schools closing, unions on strike for months on end. I don't necessarily think that that's the answer for Rochester. It may work in New York City, it didn't work in Chicago. We have to look for our own answer. And the other thing that I would reflect upon is this community just spent 2 months designing a plan in response to what Dr. Aquino said. We provided a response, it was 110 pages long, very specific in terms of who was to do what, when they were supposed to do it, and what exactly they were supposed to do. Before we start upending the apple cart and throwing out all the apples in the apple cart, I suggest that what we do is we be deliberative, methodical, and careful about the next step. We did what the commissioner asked us to do, which is to provide a serious, meaningful response to Dr. Aquino's recommendations. Let the commissioner take a look at that.
I want to give just a little bit of background for our viewers who may not be tuned into this. This was the distinguished educator that was commissioned by the State Education Commissioner, Jaime Aquino, and he came out with this report that it was tough on the district. It was also tough on the board as well. And in response, the board released a 110-page plan really trying to implement what it wants to do in terms of moving forward. Tim Macaluso of the City Newspaper, he covered that meeting and he covered the vote. I don't know if you saw his recent...
I was at the meeting.
But his recent report, he said board members at this meeting show little indication they're committed to working together to resolve their differences and lead by example.
Okay, let's look at that. I think the headlines read divided vote. The vote was 4-2. In what democracy would that be called a divided vote? That happens in Congress. That happens, my God, that happens in the New York State Assembly all the time. 4-2. That's a majority vote. The 2 people that he's referring to, had some real disagreements. But you know what? That's what democracy is about. Have you watched the parliament in Great Britain lately? That democracy sometimes exists by people exercising the right. Do we want to tell our children that democracy is not successful if there's a dissenting vote? No. Certainly we wouldn't do that. The vote was 4-2. I said at a meeting just recently, I don't know if Tim caught that. I have a lot of respect for him, but I said, understand this, my colleagues, we all own that vote now. No one board member, but every board member has a right to speak under the First Amendment. But now that is our vote. That 110-page report has to be owned by the entire Board of Education. So the fact that 2 board members, one was absent, I think, and another board member didn't vote, but we have a total of 7 members on the Board of Education. There were 6 there. 4 voted in favor of it and spoke very positive about it. So the headline sometimes feeds this narrative that is inconsistent with democratic principles. In what nation, other than the United States of America, could you speak out about something and then be called, oh, that's dysfunctional? That's what we do in America.
Well, talk to me, Van. Tell me, and just in terms of how the school board looks, how does the school board take ownership of the current state of what's going on with city school kids? What type of ownership does the board take in that? Well,
we issued a 110-page report. You know, it took us a year and a half with state permission, repeated extensions, to design a plan for East High School. One high school, which at the time had 1,800 students. One high school, which was the worst performing high school. The state agreed to give us over a year and a half to do the redevelopment plan. And look where that's gone. 30% increase in the graduation rate. So that's what we continue to do.
And is the board heavily involved in terms of what's happening at East as well?
Well, people need to understand that's not a charter school, that's not a private school. That school is run by the Board of Education. That whole redesign was driven by the Board of Education. So people need to understand that, and that, by the way, coincidentally, was never mentioned in the Distinguished Educators Report.
Say that. Say what? What was not mentioned?
The success of East High School and how they've achieved that success. Also, what was not mentioned in the Distinguished Educators Report is the fact that the state recently designed this receivership system. 5 of our receivership schools came off the receivership list altogether. One of them did what only one other school did in New York State, which is to go from receivership to good standing. None of that stuff was mentioned. So my point is, there's a lot of stuff that we need to do and fix. We need the community to do that. But I also want people to know there's a lot of stuff that is moving in the right direction. The graduation rate is going like this. The out-of-school suspension rate is going dramatically down like this. And what's happening at East High School can only be described as unprecedented. So we'll continue to do that, but we'll also continue to look for partners who can make this district better than it currently is.
All right, we have to close for now, but first, Van, I want to thank you for your time. Sure. And we will have you back on the show if, in fact, Assemblyman Gant's bills are voted on by the legislature. Sure. So we'll continue this conversation. Until then, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on mayoral control? Is it a yay or a nay, and why? Post your comments on Twitter using the hashtag NTKWXXI. For 12 years, Elaine Spall has been a fixture on the Rochester City Council. But it was last month when the political leader announced it was time to hang up her political hat and refocus her energy on a different kind of public service. Spall is also the executive director of the Center for Youth. Her decision to not seek re-election is due to an intense desire to support the needs of young parents facing homelessness at a time when agencies supporting area youth are either closing programs or facing financial hardship. Elaine Spall joins me now to discuss the critical needs for youth in our community and why time is of the essence to get those needs met. And Elaine, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you.
Thank you. So your bio includes everything from Fulbright Scholar, writer, attorney, educator. That's just a small handful of the many things that you have done or that you do. Yeah. And I'm curious as to what inspired you to add politician to that list back in 2007 when you were first elected to City Council.
Well, you know, I was recruited by Bob Duffy and a bunch of people who said we need someone smart and someone feisty. And I said, well, you know, I'm not going to agree with everything you guys want to do. You know, I'm not going to say yes to everything. And they said, we're counting on that. So I said, no, 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 no. And, you know, they kept sort of calling and coming by. And I said, no, no, no. My husband was like, I see them in front of our house. He's out there, go away, leave my wife alone. But I said, you know, Lois Geis had served for 21 years. The least I could do would serve for 4 and get somebody ready to take my seat. 4 became 8. 8 became 12, and because we have no term limits, you have to self-monitor. And I thought to myself, not only is it time for somebody else to represent our district, which is changing and growing, and it's been such a successful transformation, really, of the East District over 12 years. Every neighborhood, from downtown, where we see enormous growth, to some of our neighborhoods, even in the borders that are more of the Northeast, like on Beechwood. Those, everywhere you look, the houses and the neighborhoods are thriving. So I felt it was time. And then, as you know, I was seeing and faced with what really is a crisis. And it's a crisis of conscience for me. It's a moral crisis. It's a spiritual crisis. And I felt like the Center for Youth deserved my full attention again.
Talk about what you mean when this crisis involves the youth in our city. Yeah. Paint a picture, because I know we've talked about this before. You've said, you know, the media can cover so much, but there are a lot of things, there are a lot of layers to this. What does our community need to understand that we may not know right now?
Well, I'll tell you, I know exactly when it was. It was the first week of November. I had not made a decision yet. And I was at our little crisis nursery, and there was a 17-year-old young woman there. And she was sitting by the side of the crib, and there was a 4-month-old baby in the crib. And at about 8:15, I was there for a program. She got up and said, "Miss Elaine, I need a bus pass. I'm going back to the shelter." And I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Well, I'm homeless, and there's no place for me to go with my baby, so I'm going to leave him here. And I'm going to go back to the shelter." And I will tell you, at that moment, it was so heartbreaking to me. She was teary-eyed, and I kept saying, "He'll be fine." And she said, "He'll be fine, but I don't know if I can get back here tomorrow. I might not see him for 2 days. Will he remember me?" Now, you know, in this community, this wealthy, generous, enormously compassionate community, can we handle that? I couldn't. So I went home and I said to my husband, who, by the way, has been pushing me to get off, enough is enough for 12 years, right? He's like, "We need you home, and we have babies in San Francisco," and all that. And I told him, and he said, "You need to refocus." And I said, "I do. I really need to refocus. I need to raise an enormous amount of money to keep these shelters going, to add more shelters, to put myself in everybody's face." People probably turn and run the other way when they see me coming, because they know I'm going to tell them a story or ask them for something, and I don't care. This is my mission. You only have to have that kind of experience once to know that you are called at this moment to do something. Now, I can't do it without the Center for Youth team, which is amazing, totally amazing.
I want to ask you something. You wrote an op-ed piece at the beginning of the year. It was your dream for 2019.
Right.
And you said in so many words, and I've got the quote here, you said, "Our focus and our headlines are more likely to accompany a new popular night spot than the closing of emergency placements for parenting teens. Now is the time to do something." In that same piece, you mentioned how we look at poverty is, in so many words, misplaced. Talk a little bit, explain what
you know,
mean by that.
I hope that I didn't, you know, upset all the wonderful new restaurants, and because I love them, and, you know, and I hang out in them, and I'm so thrilled about them, but I was trying to make a point, and you know, I'm sort of a broken record around this. Let's say, for example, we lose an airlines that is getting us to Florida or to vacation spots. People would be up in arms, and we should be. And or if a very popular night spot closes, you know, we miss it. We should be upset. But we also need to add on to that message, the message of what happens when agencies and other governmental units or whoever decide to go in a different direction, or when funding is cut. So because we didn't really talk about it much, we saw over the last really 18 months to 3 years a loss of services, emergency services, and nobody really noticed. It wasn't headlines. It wasn't shocking. If we have young women who are not able to work, who are not able to finish their education, we will not move the poverty needle. We just won't. We know that is where our population is struggling. Our babies aren't poor. Our kids aren't poor. Their mothers are poor. That's our goal. So when we have a 17-year-old who's trying to finish school, staying in the shelter with her 5-month-old baby in the crisis nursery, we should find a way to keep them together. And this community can do that.
When it comes to, you said this community, we can do it.
We can
find a way.
We can do it.
Are there solutions and resources that are right in front of us that we don't realize are right there? Or is this a matter of us coming together and saying, okay, we need to create something, we need to try something, let's do something different?
Well, there's 3 things. Number 1, you and I know that Fashion Week of Rochester, which is the coolest thing, is supporting some of these shelters.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that, and I was meeting with some developers last night about a project, and they said, by the way, how can we help you? So people want to help. And Fashion Week is entree into having this amazing Rochester while we raise money. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we want to try something innovative, and that is we're looking for families, and this I think we can do, who will be emergency care providers up to 3 to 6 months for a teen mom and a baby.
And this is the extended host home
family.
This is the new program that you're working on.
So we're starting to talk about it. We've got some money from some agencies, and also some from foundations are stepping up. We want to see if this community has really got what it takes. We think it does. What if we had 10 or 15 families across Monroe County who said, I could take in a 17-year-old and a baby for a few months and host them while we figured out emergency housing and more stable housing, and versus separating them, right?
Talk about that. So what can happen in that 3 to 6 month span of time that people may not wrap their minds around when it comes to that actually can be a transformational period?
Because it could be insight into what a family unit looks like that maybe has never been something that child has seen. Coming out of trauma or coming out of abandonment, maybe they've never seen a loving family, a couple, an intimate relationship that is meaningful and powerful, and maybe they don't know how to feed or change a baby. Maybe they're not used to being alone. Maybe they could have, you know, a family around them. Now, family it's not their family forever, but we do think that there is something powerful in a messaging of we care about you and we believe in you. You know, one of the things, I was reading an article about how we've lowered our expectations. There are people that think public education is dying because we've lowered our expectations. We want to raise our expectations for this community and for our young mothers. They love their children just as much as we do. They are not bad mothers. They are not abandoning their kids. They just don't have an option. So that program is a powerful program. I think it's an amazing program. And we're also adding another 14-unit apartment building nearby here, actually, for teen mothers as well. So
I want to go back to extended host homes because I think it's just an incredible concept. And I guarantee there's someone watching right now and they're thinking to themselves, I don't know if this connects to me. I have kids, I live in the suburbs, it seems more like a city problem. What would you say to that person to basically explain to them this impacts everyone?
Because crisis does not discriminate. Crisis does not discriminate. We are all in this together. You know, there's a big, huge boat called Rochester and Monroe County, and if you begin to put a hole here, we will all sink. We got to stay together on this, and you know we have obviously suburban families. Let's say that you're a family who has an extra bedroom because your teenage daughter has gone off to college, right? And you, between September and Christmas, could take a mom and a baby for a few months. We want you. You're a single couple. You've never had children. Your grandparents, your grandchildren like mine. I can't take them because I'm not home enough. But you know you have a way to help. It's not foster care. It's not a 12-month commitment. We would be helping, we'd buy a crib and maybe give you diapers and make sure you had everything you needed so it didn't cost you anything. There might be a small stipend. It's not for someone who's trying to make some money off of this, because that's not the point. We believe that families can do this.
Right. That is an important call to action, and we're going to close on that. We are out of time, but Elaine, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your passion for our young people in this community. So to learn more about this program, to get involved in the work with Center for Youth, please go to centerforyouth.net and learn more. Well, Rochester artist Peter Pincus calls pottery a type of journalism. He describes his creations as a story in this generation. The artist's work is celebrated and collected around the globe, and for good reason. WXXI's Arts in Focus recently visited Pincus at his studio to learn more about his process and the voice of his art. Take a look.
I've been making work since 1998. I took ceramics on a whim in high school to fulfill a credit obligation, and I fell in love with it instantly. I was drawn to the wheel initially, and I made a lot of work on the wheel in high school and then in college. I started incorporating molds after that. My process would be a system-based process. I made a few discoveries in graduate school. The part of my process that is a little unique is this veneer coloring process where I take porcelain clay, I put color in it, and then pool in concrete. I found a way to color the clay, to pour it on the surface of the plaster mold, and it dries relatively quickly, so I cut it into shapes with a knife and then peel off a part. And then I can layer another color on top of that, and on top of that, and on top of that. Well, it was wild. In the beginning, no one had really seen work like this. And it was a time I was maybe just ahead of the curve of people starting to work with color or primary color or vibrant color in ceramics. And you know, now it's, if you look on Instagram, color is everywhere, and there's sort of an aesthetic shift that has happened. What I've started to believe is that pottery is a type of journalism. Pottery is not an individual thing. Pottery belongs in a museum as much as it belongs in a home because for the entire history of our world, it has expressed culture. The work that I'm making is part of a sort of a voice or a story in this generation. Probably the best feeling I've ever had was going to the Everson Museum and seeing a piece of mine in it, because I went to the Everson as a student and saw pieces of everyone's work, and that really inspired me to think differently about pottery, to take it more seriously. I went back to the museum time and time again. So to see my work in it made me feel proud that I had made a contribution. It's very exciting for me to make pottery, but to see that it's crossing boundaries, or that it's going in new directions, or engaging in new conversations. I do think it comes back to that idea that I want the work to be more accessible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be more practical or functional. That just means that it needs to connect in multiple ways in people's minds.
And that wraps up another edition of Need to Know, Rochester's news magazine. I'm your host, Helene Bianduti-Hofer. Thank you for joining me tonight and throughout the weekend. And I will see you next week right here on WXXI TV. Have a great night.